Hey everybody, I thought I would make another video of the latest 3D camera I've been messing around with because there's just nobody that's making this stuff anymore, really. You have to kind of go for what people built kind of in the past, and these cameras, when they get old, they get a lot cheaper. So basically the new rig I have here is based on the Zcam E1 camera, and I've got several modifications to it. And this is basically what the Zcam camera looks like itself. So on this body you can see this is just a pancake lens, fisheye body cap lens, but the body is pretty small. I mean, compared to even a GoPro camera in the housing, it's not that much bigger than a GoPro. This is a GoPro twin rig that I've been using for a long time. It's great for portable 3D stuff using the Mu Pro synchronizer, which is outstanding. It does lock these cameras in really good sync. I have a link for that in the description, so you can take a look at what that product is that does sync there. You have to be kind of good with electronics to do any of this stuff. You can't really buy any of this junk off the shelf except for this rig. You can buy a variant of that from iZugar. I'll have the link for his stuff too. And the interesting thing about this 3D rig is it's micro four thirds. So it's been nice for a long time to be able to see some product that you can synchronize in 3D, and this Zcam E1 setup does synchronize in 3D very well, so it's really nice to see that. It's going to have some things we're going to have to talk about why it's so strange, but micro four thirds is a huge step up from the small GoPro Hero 4 Blacks, which is what these were. So the reason that I went through all this trouble is really I wanted to do more with better quality sensors. I thought there would be a gigantic difference because micro four thirds sensor is way bigger than the 1/2.3 inch sensor in the GoPro. But it turns out the quality isn't radically different. If you're outside in bright daylight, the quality is radically different as soon as you go inside in low light situations. And the other huge deal is with the Z camera, you can change the lenses. This is just a normal camera that takes whatever lens you want to put on there. So right now on iZugar's website, he's selling this kind of rig in a VR180 variant where the cameras are both tilted up on their side like this. And I like VR180, but only for rare circumstances where you really want to throw your pixels across a full field of view. When you do that, nothing is sharp unless you're really, really close. And I mean like within 6 feet of all the stuff that you care about. If anything interesting is over 6 feet, the VR180 is still no good. Unless you can get to 8K. If you're doing 8K VR180 on some kind of rig, then it's probably acceptable. But I'm outdoors. I want to see the horizon. I want to see the mountains in the distance and stuff like that. So this rig is way better for me. The rig I built, I knew I wanted to keep the same field of view as the GoPro that I was using because I was really happy with this entire rig and everything about it, and its portability is great. And you can see the way, that you have to build the electronics up that you can get from the Mu Pro setup. You have to do some wiring. This is potted electronics, so I got silicone covering a little bit of a circuit board there, and it plugs into the accessory back slot that's on the camera. Works really well, 4K synchronized, 30 frames per second. Can't say enough good things about it. It is a bit of a pain. It's a little bit weird to use. It's pretty reliable in the end once you get it to work. It could be challenging to get it to work, but it does work. Anyways, so this thing is the new setup here, and I've kind of gone to great lengths to mess with it quite a bit. So let me cover more about this setup. So the twin Zcam E1 setup. The thing about this that's strange is if you go to iZugar and buy the full-blown rig he's got, I didn't really want the fisheye lenses in there because I wasn't shooting VR180. I wanted a more conventional wide angle of view. I don't like having to deal with the correction of circular fisheyes, even though I do have circular fisheyes that I use on this rig. And that's the beauty of this, is you can put whatever lens you want on. I can do VR180, I can do conventional 3D, I can kind of do everything because I can pick what lenses I want on there. And that's a big deal. So if you buy the rig from iZugar, they come with these dongles, and this is the big problem when you're trying to do 3D, like what's in front of me here. These cameras are relatively close together, so you can see that on the sides of each camera, I've got an old GoPro housing that's just there purely for protection. Because what happens is the rig iZugar sells you need this dongle on each camera. It fits into the I/O port. It's not a USB port, and it's big. I mean, that will cause you to not be able to put cameras next to each other at all. So I have, of course, 3 Zcam E1s. So when you look at what this looks like, it's too wide. So the closest you can put the cameras is not close enough. I mean, if you butt the other one up against there, they're too far apart. So the solution for that is I made little extension cords myself, which was no simple feat because the plug on the I/O port of the Z camera is not normal. I don't know where it originally came from, but it is really strange. This USB rig these USB cables I have on the end here, they're to power both cameras. I can have external batteries. So I use these portable, like they're made to charge phones or laptops portably, but they're just USB cables that go into the power ports of the Z camera. And I can slap this, Velcro it onto the side of the camera and drive both of those. But let me break these USBs out of there. Okay, so all I've done is if you look at the side of the Zcam, the E1 here, you can see that they have great options for connectivity here. You got HDMI, USB that only does data. You can't do power through that USB as far as I know. The I/O port, which is this very funky thing that only exists in one place. I mean, you can see when I made the extension cord, I'll give you some information on that and try to include links in the description on that as well. And then just very simple, I rigged these up as USB chargers. So there's a charge port here. If you plug that in, you can hook these remote battery packs to the thing to charge it while the whole rig's together. The reason this is critical is when you finally lock this whole rig together, you're not going to want to take it apart ever. So you can leave it permanently stuck together and the batteries go dead. You can charge them by plugging one of these in, or you can just be portable and leave this Velcroed to the side of this thing on the side of the camera, walk around with it with this on. That's what I do most of the time. So I never have to really get into the body at all. I don't have to get in and pull the data cards out either because they're the USB ports here, and I can come in through the back of these housings because they have a nice big hole in the back and plug in a USB right angle plug into the back there and leave it together all the time. But you can see, so that this used to be over here. What I've got going on to synchronize these two, just to simply reduce the amount of distance that this thing sticks out from the side of the camera, I made a little extension adapter that at least allows me to knock some of the width off. So when I have it plugged in, I'm considerably shorter, so I can, it's not that much shorter. This thing sticks out quite a bit. I'm able to get a little bit of crunch the cameras together closer. So these cameras basically, once you lock them all in here, you get about 100 millimeter distance between the two cameras. You could go more if you were a little bit more sophisticated in building your own little right angle adapter, but that's no simple feat because these little plugs, the male and female, you can't even buy them from the same place. It's almost non-existent in the world. On eBay, there's a place to buy, I think it's the males, and the females you have to buy from France, from Airbot, and I'll try to have the links in the description on that. And just making this was a little bit of a pain because these little connectors there's 12 pins very close together. You have to have practically a microscope and be very good at wiring and soldering, and then I put some hot glue just to give them some kind of protection so that they stay together, and it's been working perfectly. So that's basically the same thing that's on both sides of the camera. The way these are set up with the dongles is there's a master and a slave, and I don't know how this works or where this originally came from because I can't find these either in the world, but you can talk to the guy at iZugar, and he doesn't have it on the menu, but I asked him if I could buy just these synchronizers because the big secret here is you don't need to buy his cameras. You can buy any Zcam camera and synchronize them as long as you have these dongles. So what that means is if you ever see someone selling just the dongle, you can buy that, and then these go for about $250 a piece on eBay. Now, I have a lot of things to say about this Zcam E1. First of all, it's not a good camera. So if you're trying to do stills, I would say good luck, because your only chance to focus is on the screen on the back, and that makes it very unusual. So if you can deal with that, that's great. I'm using such wide angle lenses that they don't need to ever be focused. So I'm also shooting a lot of outdoors at a lot of f8. So you can see on the top of these lenses, I put a mark where the focus point is. And the other big problem with these cameras is infinity is never at infinity with the way these cameras were made. The lens mount on the E1 is just so not consistent that if you have several E1s, you'll notice that if you put a manual focus lens on one, it doesn't match the other one. So you have to match the lens to the body. None of that is that big of a deal. But the big killer for the E1, because the E1 is just using the same sensor that's in the Panasonic, what is it, the Panasonic GH4 or something like that. So the sensor is good quality. It's just in video mode, the quality's not that great. So I know the difference because I can hook the lenses up to a legitimate Panasonic and look at the quality. It's considerably better in video mode. I would say in still mode, it's not that different. So there's, if you're into doing 3D with stills, you're going to have to sort out your focus situation and get that locked in and understood very well before you even start shooting, because I don't think they do any zebra pattern or anything like that to get that sorted out. But that fits my need, which is I'm shooting handheld, outdoors, bright light, f8. I can fix the focus. These are super wide angle lenses. The ones I've got are Rokinon. I think it's 7.5 millimeter. It's 180 degree field of view, or 990, something like that. It's really close to the very wide angle field of view that you would get out of a GoPro. And that's what I like. In 3D, when you play that back with a head-mounted display, like an Oculus Quest 2 or a HP Reverb 2, which I have both, amazing, amazing results. You can bend the image to fill almost your entire field of view, shoot 4K, 30 frames per second. It's beautiful. It really works very well. The synchronizer, I was wondering, is it going to be really, really good? It works perfectly. It's basically gen locking these two cameras together. The only trick with the GoPro rig and this rig is that you don't get actual gen lock, you get a frame synchronization out of both the cameras. So sometimes one camera starts a frame late or early, but when the frames start on either camera, they are definitely in sync. You might just have one start one frame later, and in post you have to look for that and then sync them up. So you still need a clicker or snap your fingers or something, but you're not going to have that issue where one camera is in the middle of its scan while the other one's not. So that issue does not exist at all, which is a huge problem in 3D. A lot of people say, well, you don't need all this synchronizer stuff. You can just push them with your thumbs or use a remote and connect both cameras to one remote. That does not work, believe me. I mean, some people say they can't see the difference. It's probably because they're just not used to looking at a lot of 3D stuff. Once you've done a lot of it, you realize it has this weird mental effect on you that it just looks terrible. You might not be able to put your finger on why the image looks so bad, but you need to have cameras that are properly gen locked. That's why these rigs with these dongles, there's a bunch of electronics inside this little dongle too that does stuff on both of the sides that are different. And it's really worth the effort of getting that straightened out before you try to do 3D, because everything else just won't look that good. These rigs are not that expensive really, because the GoPros are dirt cheap now. MuPro rig, you're gonna have to fork over a couple $100 and do a lot of wiring to get it set up to build that. This thing is a bigger nightmare. So in the end, would I recommend someone to go out, do everything I did and build this rig to shoot 3D? My answer would be no, because I don't want to hear all the problems you're going to run into, because I ran into, believe me, a lot of problems, and I'm still suffering from some of the problems that this rig has. So I would say definitely not. You have to be the kind of person that almost is to the point where you like messing with electronics and stuff like this. And then you're probably going to have a pretty good need to have better quality than you can get out of anything else. I mean, the funny thing is, if you look at the quality that I can get out of the MuPro Twin GoPro Hero 4 rig, it's very similar to what I'm getting out of this. That sounds hard to believe because this is micro four thirds sensor versus 1/2.3. But the thing is, I like a fairly tight aperture because I want everything to be in focus. So you can look at what you want, not what the camera demands that you focus on. When you do that, when you stop a micro four thirds camera down to the same relative aperture, you get almost the same quality because I shoot in bright daylight. That's my thing. So there's not that much of a difference between what these two produces. This is definitely better, but the processor inside of this camera is from a Hero 5 GoPro. They use the same Ambarella processor, I believe, the same exact one that's in the Hero 5. So it's only one gen better than the Hero 4 anyways. There is a slight difference in, I'd say more than a slight difference in quality. Once you get everything sorted out and get it all working, this definitely will produce a better image in every way, in sharpness and color and contrast and all that. It does look better on this rig. So it's not like it's not worth doing for me, but it was very difficult to get this set up. To me, I need the cameras close together. That meant I had to do this where I wired up these things. It took me weeks to find these plugs alone. And then it took a long time just to wire them up because it's very delicate wiring. And I had to come up with some arrangement to rig this stuff up so that it was solid and the cameras really don't move on the rig, which I always want to make a bulletproof rig when I get it together. And this is just my typical collection of Arca rails and junk. And, you know, the hand grip is just another Arca clamp that comes off the bottom and the whole thing fully disassembles. And, you know, I had to come up with a creative way to route all the wiring all over the place to get these things to do what I want. You know, once all that's locked in there, it works. I mean, it's a chunky rig, and I'm a handheld guy, so I'm not on tripods, I'm not in studios. I'm shooting outdoors, you know, stuff, and it's a bit chunky to hand hold, but once you get it all locked in, that's why I had to go into the extent with all these cages and everything. It's not bad at all. And I love being able to externally power everything. I do the same thing with external power that I did with the GoPro. The GoPro rig, also I have a shroud that fits over it, and I slap this, you know, external battery pack to the back of that, and I can power that endlessly. Because both of these rigs, you can put a pretty big micro SD card on and just shoot a long time without having to open them up or stop or do anything. It's just about battery life more than anything else. And when you don't have to open the back, you can get these things in pretty big sizes, so you would never have a battery issue either. It would be filling the card up. But the other cool thing that this does is you can do time lapses, and I've got some examples of this stuff on the YouTube channel that you can check out what the quality is. But I think the biggest problem with this rig, the Zcam E1 twin rig, is that the flange on the Z1, the way that the lens sits on the body, when you look at how little these lenses really move when you're focusing them, you realize that the engineering of the flange has to be perfect. And this is where the E1s do not shine. You can stick a lens on there and it will be sharp in one corner, blurry in the other, and it's just because that lens is a little bit wonky on there, and you can fool with the little spring plate in there and try to tighten it up, but nothing will give you the quality that you can get. When you take these lenses like the Rokinon, stick that on I have a GX85, there's a world of difference. The quality difference is significant, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that these E1s are so, the manufacturing is just not, it's not really right. It's not the way a good camera would be built. It just means that the lens is cockeyed on there in a way that you can't fix it with focusing or anything. There's just no fixing it. And you think, well, maybe I can just stop it down to a different aperture. Oddly, with cameras, if you really look at the positioning of that lens, once you get that wrong, the aperture won't affect it as much as you think it would. So when one corner is blurry, you might be like, well, I can just stop down to f8 and that corner will clear up. It won't. So you really need, the whole rig ideally would have a better body. Like I was hoping they would make a Zcam E2 that was a little bit tighter in every way for the tolerances, but that didn't happen. I mean, to give you an idea, I have two Opteka circular fisheyes. They are very much different based on which body you put the lens on. And one of them just doesn't want to work on either body, so I got a third one that seems to be better. And then that's what you get. That variation doesn't exist on the GX85 or the G9 that I have. You can slap any of those lenses on those cameras, and their mount is so good. It's all perfectly aligned as best it can be. All those lenses look the same, and they all look good on those cameras. On these, there's so much variation. Everything is a little bit wonky. But if you can deal with all the downsides, this gives you something you can't get anywhere. You can't buy this stuff, and it's micro four thirds 3D. You can use any lens you want. The micro four thirds lenses are pretty cheap. The indoor low light capabilities of this thing are really good. So this is really where this camera shines. If you're trying to do, you know, action inside where there's not enough light, this kills the, you know, the GoPro twin thing here. There's just no substitute for having bigger lenses. That you can also crank the aperture open, and that gives you a very wide relative aperture. So you'll be bringing in 4 times the light these other camera rigs have, because the GoPros, of course, are fixed at f2.8. You can't change that. And when you look at the relative aperture on a micro four thirds, that's f8. So when I shoot f8 on this guy, it looks similar because you're at the same relative aperture. But the key is, depending on the lens you have, you can crank that lens open. I have the Optecas are f2.0. You're letting in a ton of light. And then also the micro four thirds sensor is so big, the noise can be evened out a bit more because the pixels are bigger on there. So it looks great indoors. And you can also do stills. It has a cool time-lapse feature as well, where the time-lapse begins, like if you put your interval in, it begins at the end of the saving of the image, which I always thought is how every camera should be. None of them do that. They want to be a rigid, by the book, when you said 10 seconds, I'm shooting every 10 seconds. I've never liked that, because with this rig, I have a clip of this that you can look at my channel as well. You can do a time lapse that starts in the daytime and goes all the way into the nighttime, and it'll go from a 500th of a second shutter speed automatically. You can just let it run into the nighttime, and stars come out, and it'll go all the way to an 8-second exposure, and you can have a 3-second interval there. So when it's in the daytime, it's taking frames every 3 seconds. At night, it's waiting for that 3 seconds to begin at the end of the exposure and at the end of the write out. So you get the huge exposure length, and you still get a 3-second gap between shots. So it's interesting that that's different. Everything else about the camera is pretty bad. It's a little bit a bit of a horrible body. It's gotten a massive amount of very, very bad reviews. That's why it came out ridiculously overpriced, and then people realized what it really was. And as far as normal camera goes, there's no way I would recommend anyone go buy one for any reason, unless you need a camera that you can destroy for a fairly cheap amount of money that might not even take a good picture or video compared to anything else. I mean, I bought a GX85 with 2 lenses for $500 that destroys this camera in every way. But the ability to synchronize this thing makes it priceless, because there's nothing that does this. You can't go out and buy anything. So, of course, if you're into the 3D stuff and you're looking at all the gear that's out there and what you might be able to buy, Insta360, for over a year now, they've been saying that, oh, we're going to come out with this 3D mod for the Insta360 1R. That would change everything. So the Insta360 1R would be a 1-inch sensor that you could put in a 3D rig, and I guarantee you I can hack that rig to separate those lenses as much as I want, because I like 100mm separation for the outdoor distant objects I'm shooting in 3D. And I'm sure I can saw that thing in half and bump the width between the lenses out to whatever I want, or just use whatever they come up with, which will probably be like a 65mm spacing, which would be human eye spacing. But if Insta360 comes out with that 1-inch sensor, 1R, that you can actually use the 3D mod, because they've said for 14 months that it's coming out any minute now, and they still haven't released it. If they choose to release that, this whole video is just ignore it, because that rig would destroy this instantly. But I can kind of tell you that if they do release that, I assume they'll only be able to shoot 4K per side, even though the 1R shoots 5.7K 30 natively. They can't have that little CPU inside of the Insta360 1R do both of those huge resolutions at the same time. I doubt they can. Maybe if a miracle occurs, they can pull that off, and you could shoot twin 5.7K 30 frames per second. I kind of doubt it, but even if they just did 4K 30 frames per second, that would just destroy this whole thing. You can, when I compare the Insta360 1R 1-inch sensor to anything, it just destroys it. Like the GoPros, all the GoPros get totally destroyed because that sensor is so much bigger. It really is an amazingly good sensor and lens combo. I'm a huge fan of it, but they do not want to release that 3D mod, which bothers me because the whole industry does not have anything like this. This is why I had to go through the effort of building this. It doesn't exist. So that's about it. It's a nightmare putting this thing together. It works. I haven't had a lot of failures with it. I've had, I think one camera shut down one time for some reason I didn't understand, but other than that, it's been perfect. So I have no real complaints. I mean, it's comical looking at this thing though, because when you are looking at this camera, they put the lens in the screen in upside down in this camera. So when it's on, I mean, you're not really going to see anything out of the display. When you're standing above the camera, it's usually like this, where you're looking down at it at a bit of an angle. You can't see anything. The screen goes black. The more you turn it up like this, then it gets clear. So you can see that if it was upside down, that would make sense, because now when I'm looking upside down at the screen, I can see the screen. So the polarization of the screen is 180 degrees wrong. So usually you're looking down on it. If it was the other way, you could actually read the screen and see stuff. When it's like this, you can't. I mean, this is the kind of, there's just endless reviews about how this is a camera that you shouldn't buy. So I'm standing on that side saying, individually, that camera is garbage compared to cameras that you just pay a little bit more, get a real legitimate Panasonic or Olympus if you want to get into Micro Four Thirds, or these days Blackmagic's cranking out amazing stuff for a low price. But yeah, if you're doing the 3D stuff, this is definitely a possibility. You know, it gives you some, you know, an option that it's a notch up from the stuff I've been using before. So as always, have fun with it. I just go nuts with stuff like this, trying to perfect it and make it do what I want, which is, in this case, was not easy. But hopefully someone can, if they have a need, they can get some ideas out of this thing. And, you know, these little extra battery packs are great to be the permanently slap onto these rigs, so you can go out and shoot a lot without having to keep opening up these rigs like the GoPro or this thing to swap the battery out. It's kind of a big advantage when I was building this thing. But have fun with the rigs. You know, let me know what you're struggling with. I mean, what I process the videos within in post is I'm still using Magic's Vegas. It used to be Sony Vegas. I've gotten used to it. It works fine. I mean, it doesn't take much to post-process these images and stack them together. I'm not doing like Hollywood stuff or anything, so I don't really care. That works good enough. But I use Mercalli to stabilize as well. I had a question about that, which is how are you stabilizing this stuff if you're doing handheld? So yeah, Mercalli sells stabilization that works with Vegas. I'm pretty sure they still sell that plugin. And that does work. It's got its own set of issues. I could make a video on what's wrong with that thing. And it's surprisingly poorly written interface for that thing. It does an amazing job of stabilizing, but man, the interface is like fighting you every step of the way. But it works. You know, at the end, you have to probably do it 2 or 3 times sometimes to get it to do what you want. But the results in the end are really good. So hopefully this gives you some ideas. So take care and send me any info if you know a better way to do this, because I don't know of a better way.